Okay, so then let's get started. Welcome everyone to today's webinar on the cost of bad data and why accurate data labeling is critical for AI success. I'm Elene, I'm the marketing manager at Humans in the Loop. I will be the moderator of today's webinar, and I'm joined by Yalda, who is the project manager and the speaker at Humans in the Loop, with deep expertise in operations in the data annotation industry. Now, briefly about us, Humans in the Loop is an award-winning social enterprise founded in 2017 with vision to connect conflict-affected individuals with digital work opportunities. We currently have a workforce of more than 250 conflict-affected people who are highly qualified and are working to power some of the most exciting AI applications. We provide high quality and ethical data annotation services for across different industries such as geospatial, retail, medical, automotive, and so on. Also, we have one very interesting opportunity that we would like to share with you today, especially for the AI teams. We offer a free 2-hour pilot for new AI projects. And plus, in the month of April, 5% off applies to all new data annotation projects. So if you're considering high quality and ethical data annotation services, I believe this is a unique opportunity to start working with us. Now, briefly about the webinar structure as well. We will have a panel discussion with Yalda, and then we will move to Q&A session. So please feel free to drop any questions in the chat below. And if there is any question, again, we're mindful of time, obviously, and if there is any question that we cannot answer in this 1 hour, don't worry about that, because we will make sure to send you the answer via email. Now, I think we are ready to get started. Yalda, welcome. I'm very excited to have you here.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Elena. Thanks to everyone who's joined today's session. I'm super excited to be here to talk about the importance of data for AI development. Just a little bit about me. I'm Yalda, project manager in Humans in the Loop. I've been working in data annotation space for over 4 years now, and my role involves overseeing the quality and efficiency of data labeling processes to make sure AI models of our clients get the most accurate labeling and training data possible. In today's session, we'll go over why bad data can be a costly problem for AI projects, how operational teams work to maintain high labeling standards, and also some real-world cases of data labeling challenges. Whether you're new to this field or already familiar with AI data workflows, I hope you'll take away practical insights on how to improve data accuracy for AI success.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Yalda, for the introduction. We are really excited. I think all of us in the room, we're all excited to hear your insights today. So without further ado, let's get started. I would say let's start with the basics. We know that data labeling is a fundamental concept for AI, right? And recently I read an interesting study that suggested that 85% of AI projects fail with poor data quality being a leading factor. Now, this is a fascinating percentage itself, and I'm sure most of you in the room are familiar with the concept, but for the sake of those who are not, Yalda, can you walk us through what data labeling is and why is it so critical in AI development?
Sure. Data labeling is simply the process of annotating data to make it understandable for machine learning algorithms. In simpler words, it's like teaching a computer to actually recognize things in data by giving it clear labels or tags. So this is a dog or this is a cat, for example. The accuracy of this labeled data is very, very important because AI models learn from it. If the data is incorrect or inconsistent, obviously the AI will be trained improperly. And it'll also lead to poor performance. It's also the difference between an AI that can accurately predict outcomes and one that cannot even recognize basic patterns. So essentially, high quality data labeling is the foundation upon which AI success is built. Without it, AI can't function at its best, and the risks of errors and biases increase rapidly.
Thank you, Yalda. A quick announcement. Could we all make sure that we mute ourselves during the webinar so that there are no sound incoming? Thank you so much for your cooperation. Thanks again, Yalda, for the explanation, especially because it's really simple explanation of data labeling and why is it so important for any AI project success. But also, of course, we know that not all data labeling is created equal. One of the key barriers to the market expansion of data annotation and labeling solutions continues to be the lack of high quality input data. And any attempts to train AI models with low quality data result in errors in the predicted output, with certain algorithms degrading to the point where their complete optimization is never attained, right? So with this in mind, let's move to some of the common causes of bad data in AI. What are some key factors that lead to poor data labeling?
Thank you. Thank you for this question, Elena. It's super important, obviously, very important topic. In the next slide, we have highlighted a few key factors that lead to poor data labeling. If we were to break them down, obviously the first, major one would be labeling errors. This is when data gets misclassified or tagged incorrectly. For example, an image of a cat could accidentally be labeled as a dog. That seems simple, but it can have huge consequences for the AI's accuracy because it's obviously learning from all of the classifications that we are doing or giving to it. Next up is bias in data. Sometimes the data used for labeling can reflect societal biases. This could mean underrepresenting certain groups of people or scenarios, also leading to AI models that are biased and fair. Yeah.
Everyone, sorry, if everybody can mute themselves, will be a great help for us. Because yes, thank you so much. Sorry,
Thank
Yalda.
you.
Continue.
No worries at all, no worries. Okay, to move on. Next, we've put here incomplete or missing data. This is when data points are missing or incomplete, obviously. It's like giving the AI a puzzle with some pieces missing. The model will struggle to make sense of the data and might draw incorrect conclusions. So it's just the perfect way to confuse the model in its learning process and training process. Next, we have outdated information. So imagine training an AI model on old data about trends in e-commerce and then launching it today. Obviously, it would be behind the times and provide outdated recommendations. So that's also not very ideal. I put one more thing here. It's incorrect taxonomy. This one might be a bit more technical, but essentially it refers to misclassifying categories and also having inaccurate categories to begin with. So for example, if you label a red apple as a green apple, that's a mistake. But if you apply that to more complex data, the results can be far worse. So obviously, in the first place, it's important to be mindful of the taxonomy and the overall scope we are applying for classifying the data before we train the model. So that's super important.
Yeah, thanks, Yalda. I never realized that there were so many layers to this, to be honest. It's like making sure that every piece of information is in the right place. And I know that you have some real world case studies that you would like to share with us today that shows poor data labeling and the consequences it had. So maybe you can also share them with us as well.
Of course. I have two very famous yet interesting case studies to share with you today that demonstrate the bad data impact on AI perfectly. Some of, probably most of the people in the room are already familiar with these cases or have, at least heard of them, but I think it's important to go over them anyways to highlight how severe bad data can be for AI. First, we've got the Amazon's AI hiring tool back in 2018, basically where they developed an AI system to help automate their hiring process. However, it didn't end up being so successful. It was biased against female candidates because the model was trained on resumes from a male-dominated workforce. The AI learned to favor resumes from men which resulted in a skewed and unfair hiring process. We can take, some key highlights from this case study. First, obviously, would be that training data quality determines AI fairness. If the input data is biased, the AI model will also be biased. Amazon's system reflected the past hiring trends of a male-dominated tech industry instead of being an objective evaluator based on, the person's merits and, experience. Um, Next up, obviously, AI doesn't think like humans, the way we do. It follows patterns. The AI didn't explicitly hate women. It just statistically associated certain words and backgrounds with stronger job performance based on historical hiring decisions. This also showed that AI is only as good as its training data and algorithmic design. Now, lastly, the two important items that I have to share is fixing AI bias is harder than it seems because Amazon actually tried to tweak the system to be more neutral but couldn't guarantee fairness. Ultimately, they had to scrap the project instead of using it. This is a case that we are seeing more and more each day with the rise of AI and also, all the important ethics coming to play where some projects are fully scrapped or, clients or, companies are actually not moving forward with so many of the ideas, for example, that would work for them many years ago. So this is a very interesting point to make. Blindly automating decision making can be risky. AI was meant to speed up hiring, but instead it reinforced discrimination. Relying too much on AI without human oversight can obviously lead to unethical and illegal outcomes at times. So that's very tricky. Now we're already on to the next slide. The Google Photos case study. Uh, that's where I think obviously back in 2015, Google Photos came under fire when their AI mislabeled photos of Black people. This wasn't just a simple mistake, it was a failure in both labeling accuracy and also taxonomy. The model didn't have the right categories, and the consequences were both embarrassing and quite harmful. Google tried to quickly apologize and they removed the offensive label from Google Photos. But instead of fully fixing the issue, Google reportedly blocked certain labels altogether rather than improving the model. It's one of the most cited examples when discussing algorithmic bias, fairness in AI, and also the importance of diverse training data sets, given the sensitivity around the outcome that it produced. Also, we can take some major takeaways from this case study, how bias in AI is a real and serious problem. The model, misidentified Black people due to biases in its training data. This shows obviously how AI models can reflect and amplify societal biases if not properly addressed. Diversity in training data is crucial. The AI model likely had insufficient or imbalanced training data for people with darker skin tones. Google Photos case study, it just is a perfect example of how there is a huge need for diverse data sets that fairly represent all demographic groups, not just one or a couple. Lack of proper testing can also lead to major failures. Obviously, Google did not catch this issue before releasing the product, suggesting inadequate testing with diverse user groups. So pre-release testing on various demographics is very, very important for any product, for any company to consider. And obviously, it would have prevented this incident to go so publicly and be a failure. Quick fixes are also not always real solutions because instead of improving the model, Google blocked certain labels from being used, a solution that avoids the root problem rather than fixing it. And this is why AI systems must be continuously monitored and improved because they evolve over time and must be regularly checked for bias and accuracy. It also shows why continuous audits, feedback loops, and transparency is it's very necessary. Lastly, ethical AI is just as important as functional AI. Even highly advanced AI from top companies, like Google and Amazon, can make harmful and offensive mistakes if ethics aren't prioritized. AI developers, company stakeholders, they have to consider the societal impact of their models, not just their accuracy. So yeah, I hope we can take away all of these key factors from these case studies and kind of like have a deep think about it.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing, Yalda. I think these are really very interesting case studies. Both of them show well the importance of data labeling in AI development, but they also highlight the need to consider these errors from a broader business perspective, in my opinion. And I can talk based on my example as someone working in the marketing. I can say that when companies make data labeling mistakes in AI projects, the impact goes far beyond that specific project. It affects the overall business, brand reputation, it affects the public perception. And companies like Amazon and Google, they invest millions in their brand identity and image each year. So failures like this don't just harm the AI model or just a specific project. They can damage trust in the brand and in the company itself. And imagine the consequences of such error for the smaller companies. So that's why I see the case studies that you shared with us today very interesting as data labeling lessons. And they also serve as a critical reminder to AI teams that consequences of such errors extend beyond technology and can have serious business implications afterwards. Now that we understand the cost of bad data, Yalda, could you break down for us in simple terms what are some more specific causes contributing to poor quality labeled data according to your experience at Humans in the Loop?
Sure. Just to like look at it from a perspective of a data labeling provider, also more focused on how we manage all of the projects. There are, some very important items that I can think of. Obviously, the first is human error. When annotators make mistakes, when the data set is not thoroughly reviewed, and there are obvious mistakes that could actually lead to poor performance of the AI. Um, More important than that, I would actually say it would be also very difficult to work with unclear guidelines um, because inconsistent instructions lead to variations in terms of how different annotators are approaching the labeling of the data. And that's why it's so important for us in Humans in the Loop. In the beginning, in the very early stages of the projects that we work on, we really want to make sure we have the most clear understanding of the guidance and taxonomy, and we are in very direct communication with the client to understand the scope as best as we can. There's also bias in labeling, very, very tricky. As we've talked about the case studies, subjective labeling can introduce unintended bias. And this is also a real problem in the projects that we work on. And then another highlight that we have here that I have to share with you is the automation errors that can lead to performance issues for the model and the algorithms. So AI assisted labeling isn't perfect yet, although there has been a lot of improvements in the past couple of years, and we've seen a lot of models coming out that can actually label images, in an automated way. Again, the human supervision and the human touch is, still very, very important. And yeah, it's important not to overlook the errors that can actually come out from automation. So these are the items that I can share right now.
That's really insightful, Yalda. Thank you. And out of these factors and causes, which do you think is the most common issue in the real world projects?
Yeah, I think I kind of hinted at it already. I think right now, it's really for me would be unclear guidelines, because it also can actually like unclear guidelines leads to human error. It leads to bias in labeling, and it also leads to even automation errors. So I think because it's such a root problem and a root cause, it's one of the most important that we can actually pay most attention to, because it can actually prevent a lot of errors or performance issues if it's taken care of properly from the beginning.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you so much, Yalda. And now that there are so many challenges that the team can face with working on the data sets, what are the things we can do to make the outcome better?
Yeah, I mean, that's the golden question. Here in this slide, you can see we have put some items here for preventing bad data in data labeling projects. The first one is obviously strict quality control, multi-level reviews and verification, where we give ourselves the opportunity to make sure we can spot errors and quality issues in the labeling of the data set. And we take this one very seriously. Obviously, we have a team here, QA team, team of supervisors directly working with the annotators to ensure that we can apply as many quality layers as we can. So yeah, that one is very important and very practical. And then next up, well-defined taxonomy and guidelines. Probably I've talked about it a lot already, but it's important to standardize categories for consistent labeling, because oftentimes as a data labeling service provider, I think it's on us to make sure that, the client is clear in what they want their taxonomy to be. And if something is unclear, we can work with them to make sure um, the taxonomy is set in stone and set in place before we start working on the project. And then obviously there needs to be a mitigation strategy for bias in data to actively detect and correct biases. And this goes as far as, edge cases, hard cases, biases that the annotators are facing on the project. Is important for them to kind of like actively notify the project supervisors, the QA team, that they're facing all of those challenges. And also for us to communicate directly with the client that these are the challenges that we're facing. How should we go about it? How should we handle them? How, best can we mitigate the bias that we're seeing in the data set? So it's all about collaboration on, different ends to make sure that the outcome that we have is as good as it can be. And then obviously data validation, cleaning, pre-processing to remove inconsistencies. Sometimes this is overlooked because just from our perspective, when clients reach out to us, they already have their data set, they've already done the pre-processing themselves. Sometimes still things can be missed. So again, it's we make sure that we can validate and check the data.
Yalda, I think you're mute. Yes, you're back.
Yeah. So basically, before we start the project, we make sure that we can validate the data once. We can see, if there's any problems with that, if we should inform the client, if there's something that needs to be done in terms of pre-processing. So that's also something we could do to prevent bad data labeling in projects, in introducing new taxonomy or new tags. For example, this is a bad image, this is a good image, this is what we're working on. You can get technical like that. And then obviously, lastly, very, very important, ethical and compliance standards. Adhering to legal and ethical frameworks is something that we prioritize greatly. Obviously, it's more and more important every day with how, the interest in AI is rising for all of us to kind of be responsible. And again, I really am a firm believer that a data labeling service provider plays a huge role in this, to make sure, for example, to flag uh, the ethical concerns that we might have specific to a taxonomy or a project to clients. For example, we sometimes say, hey, this is not going to work. We're not going to work on such a project, or we're not going to label or classify things the way you intend to. So how can we alter it in a way that would be appropriate, that would be ethical, and actually comply to all of the standards that have been set in place over the past few years? So these are some of the important things we do to prevent bad data in labeling projects.
Yeah, and I would say that those are very important things. There are a lot of layers to this. And of course, obviously at Humans in the Loop, and we talked already about that, but our priority is obviously to provide high quality labeling, and we take it very seriously. What best practices at HITL, what are the best practices that we implemented in HITL, and of course, those practices that you can and you're able to share with us today to ensure labeling accuracy. What are those?
I love this question, Elena. I get super excited about some practices that we have. Most famously, obviously, we offer a free trial round first before we engage with clients. You know, if they're a first-time client, to ensure that we are actually aligned with the expectations on both sides in terms of, you know, as I've said, it's so important to have clear guidelines, to know the taxonomy very well, to know the scope very well, to do a check on a data set to see if everything is set in place. It actually gives us the opportunity to understand what it is that we need to do. And also kind of like demonstrate our capabilities to the client. So it's kind of like hitting multiple birds with one stone. I'd like to think of it in that way. But yeah, this collaboration with the client continues in the lifespan of the project. So for example, if we are flagging edge cases throughout the project, this would be identifying tricky data points early on so that we don't have to go back to the data, have multiple rework rounds, and just overall increasing the efficiency is super, super important. So yeah, it's just super it's a given that we have to make sure we can highlight all of these edge cases to the client so that we could know in turn how to handle them and how to approach them so that we could have a consistent data set overall after the project is completed. And lastly, peer review, multi-layer QC. As I've mentioned before, we have a QA team. We have a dedicated set of supervisors for different teams, annotators. Multiple rounds of QC are set in place to make sure that the data quality is on par with the expectations of the client and us. And there are so many evaluations, spot checkings that we have set in place to make sure that also can be measured. Here, as you can see, I've put the HITL quality assurance flow. As you can see, it's kind of like very intense. There are so many different steps. It starts with project setup, deployment, quality control, and then it finishes obviously with project approval and submission phase. But all of these different phases that we have require so many different steps. For example, we start with creating an HITL guide. This is where we ask all of our questions, you know, what is this class? What is that class? What are we supposed to do here? This is an edge case, for example, to make sure that we can perform a pre-deployment review of the data set to verify project setup on the correct tool. Sometimes we require to kind of change tools if a client has a preferred tooling that might not work with the scope that they're after. We can kind of suggest alternatives, see what can work better. So yeah, and then obviously we like to develop video tutorials for projects and we're deploying them to the teams because we think it's important to kind of always have that visual whenever necessary because training calls, you know, although very, very useful and they, you know, they are bound to happen, they finish, you know, and they're in the past, but a video tutorial can be very useful if annotators kind of need that refresher of like, you know, what is it that is supposed to be done on the data and the project itself. And then we move on to deployment, you know, having all of the project trackers to make sure we can track the progress of the team. And then we have quality control, which is super, super exciting. We always apply an initial QC round on the projects that we work on, where we kind of work on a small batch of data to understand if there are things that can be of concern in the project itself in terms of quality and all of the items that I've already covered in the previous slides. So that kind of gives us a good idea of where the team is at, if we need more training, if there is bias in the way the annotators are approaching the annotations. And obviously, we're going to have feedback rounds after this. We're going to schedule call for detailed explanation of what's wrong, what's not wrong. And obviously, the flow is different if there are changes required or if there are no changes required. But, you know, after the project is, you know, annotated, we also do a full QC round because it's important to kind of make sure we maintain the quality from the initial QC round to the final round of the submission before we give the data to the client. And in between these, as I've said, QA specialists, supervisors, annotators themselves, they work on spot checking, full 100% QC in some layers to make sure the data has been labeled correctly. And then finally, we can move on to project approval and submission. And that's when we kind of like have the client's approval too, after they have gone over the annotations and reviewed all of the materials. So yeah, it's kind of a very, it's a very long and intensive process, but it's worth it because it ensures that the data that the client has at the end of the lifespan of the project is worth it, and that they can train a good model, a good AI model based on the data that we have provided for them.
Thank you, Yalda. I love this HITL quality assurance flow. And as you said, it's an intense process, and there are so many layers to this. And thank you for sharing these insights again. I believe for all of us in the room, the internal practices and to see the internal practices, it's always very interesting. Now, for the teams and for AI teams that who want to get this right, what are some actionable takeaways? I know that there may not exist exactly one golden rule, if we call it like that, but if you could give AI teams and data annotators one or more golden rule or rules for better data labeling, what would it be?
That's a great question. I mean, I cannot give only one, so I'm gonna, highlight a few. Obviously, the first one for me would be to never assume the first round of labeling is perfect because it almost never is. It's just not possible. Validation is everything. That's why at Humans in the Loop we always start with the trial round. Make sure we're aligned with the client's AI goals before we proceed with anything else. Another key rule is to not ignore edge cases. It's very easy to do so. It's very easy to kind of like, go to kind of decide not to see the edge cases, the hard decisions that we have to make and kind of ignore them, but they are very important. They are tricky, they're ambiguous, and they can make or break an AI model. So it's very important that we actively flag them early on and work with the client closely to refine the guideline if necessary, or update it if necessary during the project. So finally, I would say quality control isn't a one-step process. It's a layered approach. We always have at least 2 levels of peer review, pod supervisors, QA specialists working on the data sets if necessary, checking the data to ensure accuracy and consistency. Products are different. Sometimes we need to have different approaches when the project requires a more intensive QA layer, let's say. So if I had to sum it up, I would say these words: to test early, to flag uncertainties, and to always double check. That's how we can make sure we are getting high quality data that drives AI success.
Thank you, Yalda. Well, there may not be one specific golden rule, but those were quite practical advices, I would say, and thank you for that. Before we move on to with the Q&A session, and I would love to encourage everyone to write your questions in the chat below so that we can answer to those questions. I think it will be great if we summarize today's key points for everybody.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I was just starting from the beginning, what the items that we've covered. Bad data can lead to serious AI failures. You've seen how labeling errors, bias, and outdated or incomplete data can cause AI models to make poor or even harmful decisions, like Amazon's bias hiring tool and Google's photo mislabeling incident. And then high quality data labeling is the foundation of AI success. It's where it all begins. AI is only as good as the data it's trained on, so proper taxonomy, strict quality control, and bias mitigation strategies are essential for reliable AI models. Finally, best practices ensure accuracy and efficiency. Trial rounds help align expectations, flagging edge cases early prevents errors, and also multi-layered quality control ensures the final data set meets the highest standard. So here in Humans in the Loop in the operations team, we always love to revisit the flow that, for example, I showed you now, a couple times each year to see if there are things that we could be doing better in terms of being more effective in our collaboration with the clients and the projects that we work on. So yeah, I think these are the highlights from today's session.
Thank you so much, Yalda. Very, very interesting, and I hope everybody found interesting our insights today. With this in mind, let's open up the floor for some questions. And I would love, once again, to encourage everybody to send your questions in the chat below. I'm just going to double check. What questions do we have so far? Maybe we can give 1 minute to everyone to formulate their questions and just drop them in the chat below. Or you can also open your microphone if you want to, and you can ask your question directly.
I see a question
Yeah.
from Garashi. It's a super interesting question. It's saying if the object is slanted, should the labeling also be affected by it, or should I just label it as it's focusing on the edges? This is a very specific question that we cannot have a general answer to. It's about specifics of the annotation strategy and the approach that you're taking, and this will always be defined in in a project specific how to say approach, where for example one project might require you to actually label what you see only, at the object as is in the image, whereas another client, for example, would want the data to be labeled in terms of how the object would have been, even if there were no effect, if it wasn't changed or affected by the surroundings or the environment. So it all depends on the project. That's a question that you have to kind of share with the project supervisor, so that they could support you with it. If it's something that hasn't been defined in the project taxonomy, then we come to play. We kind of, ask the client, you're like, hey, this is what we have in the data set. How should we go about it? What's the correct thing to do here?
Thanks,
So
Yalda. Thank you so much. We received another question. What are some key indicators that data labeling might be inaccurate in an AI project?
well, it depends on, the stage of, what phase of the project we're at, because there are so many indicators. For example, if the model performance has issues, or if, it's producing poor predictions, that's an indicator. But that's, in the final stages of the project where the client, for example, will come back to us and say, hey, this is not working for us. And that's basically a scenario that we wouldn't want really, and we would like to prevent it from happening. So earlier in the earlier stages of data labeling, annotation consistency, for example, if there are problems around it, if the annotators are having problems kind of having a unified approach on what to label, what not to label, that's an indicator that the guide is not clear, or that there's bias, or that there are edge cases, and that's something that is a red flag for us, and we kind of like try to prevent. We try to mitigate the situation and kind of like collaborate with the client on how to move forward and handle such hard cases. And then obviously during our QA, manual spot checking, quality control failures, if we witness such things in the QA stage, then obviously that's an indicator of issues in the data labeling. And again, as I said, if there are edge cases or a lot of confusion around what needs to be done, that's also red calling. So I think these are some of the indicators, some of the good indicators we see every day.
Thanks, Yalda. We have another, I think, very interesting question from Hester. How do you ensure that bias is minimized in the labeling process? Now, that's a really interesting and very important topic, I would say.
That's a very, very good question, because um, sometimes bias is, there, and that's the expectation. Bias is not always, you know, so negative, but it can be very negative. So as soon as we notice patterns of confusion or patterns of, a certain approach in the labeling that might be, kind of like a concern to the model's performance at the end of the project, we kind of flag it right away. So we always have our annotators kind of like follow the rules that the project is requiring. But if the supervisors, if the QA specialist, if the QA specialists or the project managers notice a certain pattern on a project, we always kind of get together, come together, kind of understand what this bias is for, if it's going to be a concern, and then kind of like collaborate with the client on how to mitigate it if it's something that needs to be prevented. But then again, bias sometimes is the thing that the client is after. For example, sometimes the clients want us to have multiple different annotators work on the same set of images to understand the bias, right? Because the human minds, they work differently from one mind to another. So they actually want to see all of the different outcomes that the labeling can have. So we take it very seriously, but also sometimes it's just, it comes with it's just the nature of labeling things as a human.
Thanks, Yalda. We have also another very interesting question, and personally, I'm very excited to hear the answer to this one. So, what are the biggest challenges in maintaining high-quality labeled data at scale, and how does humans in the loop handle them?
Oof. So, I think anything, if you want to scale anything in terms of, the service that we're providing, the product, whatever it be that the focus is on, is always challenging. It's super difficult. The first thing that comes to my mind would be consistency and accuracy. As data sets become bigger and bigger, ensuring all annotators follow the same guidelines becomes harder because obviously the project would require a higher number of annotators, obviously to be active on the project. So to combat that, we use clear annotation instructions, training sessions, multi-layer quality control with peer reviews, as well as a dedicated trial round in the beginning, in the very early stage of the project to make sure we can kind of limit all of the issues that can arise with the data labeling, but also managing a high volume of data without losing quality is always tough. So kind of we try to use a human in the loop HITL approach to balance efficiency with precision, where we always have human supervision involved. We never, back down from the standard practices that we have in terms of QA. Again, biases increase, subjectivities increase, different annotators may interpret data differently, leading to inconsistencies. Also, it's more expensive to work on bigger projects, obviously. And then time management of it all also becomes very challenging. High quality labeling is resource intensive. So we always try to find a sweet spot where it would be cost effective for our clients to work on bigger data sets, but also we never take, high quality labeling for granted, because that's obviously something that we will always adhere to. We will always try to adhere to. Doesn't matter, the amount of resources that we have to allocate. So I hope this answers the question.
Thank you, Yalda. We have still quite a lot of questions left. Thanks, everybody, for sending your questions in our chat. So I'll move to another one. Can you discuss how frequent updates or changes in data affect the accuracy of AI models in real time?
Yep. That's a very, very interesting question. Basically, when data changes often, these models, they become less accurate because they were trained on older patterns that are no longer matching the real world conditions. So this happens in things, in industries like finance, for example, fraud detection or recommendation systems, where trends are shifting over time. So if labels are inconsistent or new data is biased, the model can start making mistakes or hallucinating. So to keep it accurate, teams should always regularly check performance, test new data before updating, the model itself, and also use human oversight, human in the loop, to make sure the model learns the right things. So that's why, we also provide monitoring services for AI models that are already, they have already been created. It's just, about making sure that they can maintain the high performance and kind of like also be updated where necessary, collaborating with the clients.
Thanks, Yalda. Next question. And we also have a very interesting blog on our website that I would highly recommend about tools and platforms that Humans in the Loop is suggesting. So the question is exactly about the tools. So what tools or platforms do you recommend for high quality data labeling?
Yeah, so again, this is a very, very, very loaded question because we now, in 2025, we have so many tools available, even, free tools, enterprise tools, paid tools that, can cater into, any sort of projects based on what you need, what you're after, what type of data you have, what type of annotation you want to perform. What is the model, what is the thing that you want to create at the end. So it's really, there's no one perfect answer for this, but some names that I can share, based on experience, the tools that I've used a lot, for example, in the past few years would be CBAT. Obviously, I'm sure everybody has heard the name, it's a household name at this point. Label Studio, V7, all of these have their own strengths. For example, V7 is spectacular for video labeling. Label Studio gives such a high flexibility in terms of project setup, where you can kind of like play around with, how the project interface will look like when you're annotating the data. So that's so exciting. And CBAT has just been so reliable for so many years that, it's just the go-to for, a lot of the use cases, a lot of the different types of annotations that one might need to do. So yeah, I would suggest for everyone, if they're wondering what tool to use to kind of like Google about it, kind of like see what the features are, if they want to pay for a tool, if they want to use a free available tool. It all depends on what they're after and what they want out of the product.
Thanks, Yalda. And following again, tools and platforms, how big a role does the annotation tool or platform play in achieving high quality and accurate data output results?
That is super important. That's why there's also before we, when we are performing the trial round with the client, testing what it is, what the scope is and what the taxonomy is. It's super important for us to set up the project in the right tool because we will sometimes we're able to reduce for example, the annotation time or the time that it takes to focus on a scope if we're using a proper project setup. And sometimes some tools, have better features that allow you to kind of play around a bit more and have a more efficient way of labeling, according to the use case. So it's super, super important what tool you're going to choose for a certain project. And obviously this is something that we can suggest, to clients what to go to. We are very, very flexible. We can work with, probably the majority of the tools out there, but it's also, we take it very seriously to kind of suggest, what could be better, if we change the tool or if we have an alternative. So yeah.
Thank you, Yalda. So we have 10 more minutes. Of course, we're mindful of the time, and we have two more questions to go. Also, I'm just going to quickly remind everybody that if there's any question that we are not able to answer due to the time limit, no worries about it, because we will be sending you the answer via email. So two more questions that we have in the chat that I can see. How do you ensure data confidentiality?
Very, very important question process that, obviously as a service provider, we have to really consider. And depending on the level of sensitivity that goes into the data, when we talk to the clients, there are multiple things that we could do: signing NDAs, extending it to, signing this, for all of the annotators, for all of the teams who will be looking at the data. working on specific domains that the client, for example, is providing us for the tool, working with certain IP addresses if the data is, like super confidential. So it all depends on how the client wants to approach it and, the requirements that they set for us. Yeah, we take this very seriously. Sometimes projects require for the annotators to actually even work on certain devices, controlled monitor devices. But yeah, it just depends on what the client really wants and what the requirements are. But there are just so many things that can be done to maintain privacy and data confidentiality.
Thanks, Yalda. That's a very important topic. I would also mention that. So the last question that I can see in the chat for today, it's a great discussion. However, the client prepares the project guidelines. How can annotators and supervisors identify if the guidelines are incorrect?
Yeah, I love this question. So we don't encourage the team to find the incorrect, scope or the taxonomy or the classes or the rules that the client have said, but rather confusing parts of it, or if it's incomplete, or if it's something that is causing for different annotators to interpret for example, the information differently. So if it's causing a problem in the usual flow of the annotation and the labeling process, then that's something that should be flagged and highlighted with the supervisor, from the annotators. Another case would be, for example, if we have a client guide and then we share a certain feedback that's shared by the client, and then they don't go hand in hand. They're different, how to say it goes against the rules, for example, that the client have shared for the labeling itself. So it's just about communicating where things are questionable. When the labeling just gets super difficult and hard, and it might not come naturally or be easy for the team to kind of, for example, say this is a dog or this is a cat. I know these are super easy examples, but yeah, it's more about identifying challenges and flagging concerns that all parties are kind of seeing or observing.
Thank you so much, Yalda. I think we're getting to the final part of our webinar. Thank you all for your interesting questions and for attending our webinar. Thanks to our amazing Yulia for assisting us. And of course, many thanks to Yalda for your time and for such an informative session. And I believe that the insights that you have shared with us today, especially AI teams across different companies and industries, would find very valuable. So we hope that this webinar has provided you with a deeper understanding of the importance of accurate data labeling and its vital role in AI success, especially based on some real-life case studies that Yalda has shared with us, and also some tips based on her experience. Before we wrap up, and I'm going to, of course, give the final word to Yalda, just a quick reminder about an opportunity that we offer to different companies and AI teams. So if your team is exploring high quality and ethical data annotation services, Humans in the Loop offers a free 2-hour pilot for new AI projects. And don't forget that in the month of April, we are offering 5% of all 5% off all new data on all new data annotation projects. And so I think it's a great opportunity to start working with us. Also, if you'd like to continue the conversation or have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly. You can contact us via our website form on humansintheloop.org, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. So Yalda, would you like to wrap us up?
Sure. Thank you so much, Elena. This has been very fun. I'm super happy to have had this discussion. Obviously, if anyone, as you said, anyone has a question or if they're interested in kind of reaching out, I'll be more than happy to discuss, any items or related topics. So yeah, again, thanks everyone who's joined today, and I hope that we can have a great rest of the week.
Once again, thanks everyone for participating in today's webinar. We wish you a great day ahead of you, and we hope to see you again in another HITL webinar as our webinar series continues. So goodbye for now.